so you get the idea of my range of interests. I've gone from pirates to transvestites. The boy needs a hobby, he needs to make a living. Thanks for all for having me here. This has been a delightful meeting so far. Chris has told me how excellent the program was yesterday, and I can see why she said so. I'll be talking today about the pirates Laffite and pointing out, among other things, that they weren't pirates. But that kind of fits in a way. You know, we live in an age of mythology. It isn't just something that happened to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Myth is around us all the time. Myth has played a large role in our own national history and in our understanding of who we are. So it's to me always interesting to look into what has been said versus what's taken place with some of the American folk heroes that we have. And that's the Laffite, believe it or not, are folk heroes of the time. But of all the storied characters in Louisiana's past, these two brothers, Jean and Pierre Laffite, surely rank among the most notorious and noteworthy. A few things about them. For one thing, most people for most of the last 200 years have been misspelling their name. Now you saw it in Mr. Price's Ashia, but I'm not picking on you at all, Eddie, but it's a perfect example. It's spelled L-A-F-I-T-T-E. I think at one time the National Park in New Orleans spelled it L-A-F-I-T-T-E. They may have changed it by now, I don't know. That's the wrong spelling. That's how every other Laffite on the planet spelled the name, except this one Laffite family. They spelled it L-A-F-F-I-T-E. This may not seem real important to you, but I can tell you to a biographer, it was a wonderful gift to have these two fellows with a virtually unique spelling of their name. It helped me, among other things, to identify forged documents. Because there's a lot of forged Laffite documents. There's a whole collection of them in the library out in Texas. But they always spell the name the wrong way. And while you may not think privateers and smugglers, even pirates, as the Laffites are very bright, you might assume that at least they know how to spell their own name. As in fact they did. Both Laffites were literate. Pierre much more so than Jean. L-A-F-F-I-T. This spelling thing business can get you in trouble. Back in the 1970s, when the bicentennial came around, I was in the magazine publishing industry. And we were contacted by the Dolly Madison Ice Cream and Baked Goods Company. I don't know if they distribute or did distribute things down here. They contacted me, wanting to see if they could work out some kind of an endorsement arrangement whereby our magazines, which were all history-oriented, would somehow do some features on Dolly Madison and wind up endorsing their product. But when I wrote back to them pointing out that they were misspelling her name, they never responded. Dolly Madison spelled her name D-O-L-L-E-Y, and of course the ice cream and the little Twinkie type things that they sold left out the E. These little feats have been the object of all manner of lore down here. They've appeared in novels. They appeared on the stage. They've certainly been depicted in film, as I'm sure you're all aware of, occasionally even on television, almost always inaccurately. There are innumerable stories about Laffite buried treasure. Don't get me started. I'd say probably once every 3 or 4 years, I get a call from someone who refuses to identify himself, but whose tenor of voice just reeks of paranoid schizophrenia. Telling me he has figured out where the Laffite treasure is. Well, I'm sorry to ruin the story for you, Virginia. Pirates didn't bury treasure. Privateers didn't bury treasure. They spent it. Imagine, just call yourself, like Captain Thunderguts or some really great name like that. And you've got untold millions of dollars worth of treasure that you've taken that is always in the form of gold doubloons as opposed to things like silks and tobacco and whiskey and slaves, the real treasure that they got. And you decided that you're going to continue living your life in a rather squalid cabin on a vessel, subject constantly to being attacked and sunk and killed by the lawful authorities of Great Britain or the United States or someone else. You're going to prefer that and bury your treasure and come back and get it some other time, or maybe just leave a map to where it is, and then see if somebody 150 years later can figure it out. You know all that stuff Chris Bell was talking about going into those outhouses there at the plantation? This is waist deep in that. Pirates didn't bury treasure. And then there's one wonderful fellow, the best one so far, I have no idea what his name is, if he's here in the audience. You are out of your damn mind. Who told me not only had he figured out where Laffite's treasure was, and this somehow involved turning the Bible upside down, looking at it in a mirror, counting every third word, and picking out the middle letter, and they gave him directions to a cemetery in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm not joking. But it really wasn't Laffite's treasure anyhow, because Laffite was just an assumed name. He was really Fletcher Christian, the man who, of course, leads the mutiny on the battle. Dude, life is tough, but it's a whole lot tougher when you're a moron. But these are just examples of the kinds of stuff that surround about the Laffites. I'll try to give you some genuine information. Remarkably little is known about most of their lives, and much of what is assumed to be common knowledge, as I think you've gotten the message by now, is myth. For a start, they were half-brothers. Sons of the merchant Pierre Laffite by two wives, born in the village of Pauillac in the Gironde estuary of the Medoc region in France. Pierre probably in 1770, and Jean most likely in 1782. One of the ways we were able to pin down where they were born is that unique spelling of the name, because their father spelled it that way too, and that's how it appeared in the parish records. Romance, for some reason, has seized upon the younger brother rather than the older. And while Jean makes it into popular fiction and films and movies, in the person of Frederick March long, long ago, Yul Brynner, among others, Pierre gets left out almost entirely. He's often almost dismissed as a kind of slow-witted hanger-on of his younger brother, whereas in fact Pierre appears to be the guiding hand behind their business affairs, while the more attractive and personable Jean was the public face of their enterprise. I did a book about now 10 years ago called The Pirates Laffite. It's recently been optioned for a film. That doesn't mean anything. For every film that's made, about 500 books are optioned. You get maybe $1 or something like that, so it's tough for it to go to your head. Looking now like if they find somebody, it may be a joint Anglo-French production. My choice to play Jean Laffite is Johnny Depp, of course. I'm skeptical that Pierre will make the cut. He'll probably wind up on the cutting room floor. But if he does make it into the film, I expect he'll be portrayed by Danny DeVito. Jean left France first as a seaman. Near as you can tell, he was already in or near Louisiana in 1802 when his brother Pierre got a passport to come join him. By March of 1803, Pierre had reached New Orleans, bringing with him a mulatto mistress, the first of several, and a son. And over the next decade, he would be a merchant here and then in Baton Rouge in Pensacola. It's virtually certain that neither he nor Jean was ever a blacksmith, as popular legend holds, and neither had any verifiable connection with the place today known as Laffite's blacksmith shop on Royal Street, other than the fact that Pierre for some years maintained one of his later mistresses, mulatto mistresses, Marie-Louise Villard, in a house across the street. So that corner got associated with the Laffites, and somehow or other in the wonderful workings that mythology has, in time the Laffites got associated with a particular building. It's just the wrong one. And the building, by the way, was never a blacksmith shop either. It's been a private residence until it became a bar that calls itself the Laffite Blacksmith Shop. In 1804, Pierre began working in the slave trade, foreshadowing what would be the Laffite brothers' real future enterprise. Meanwhile, Jean's activities are virtually unknown from the time of his birth until about 1809, when he does appear in New Orleans and one New Orleanian referred to him as the notorious Captain Laffite. Sadly, we don't know what he was notorious for, though the word notorious is usually not applied as a compliment. He reportedly imported slaves that had been captured by illicit privateers, smuggling them into Louisiana through Barataria Bay and other isolated spots on the coast. Rather than operating his own vessel, however, Jean Laffite may have been working as a middleman between the privateers and his brother Pierre, who marketed the slaves in and around New Orleans. All of this, of course, is in violation of the 1807 law abolishing the foreign slave trade. The important thing to remember from the outset dealing with these men is that they are not pirates. Pirates and privateers are radically different, though men frequently did cross over the line from one to another. A pirate is an outcast, seizing the ships of any nation with no pretext whatever, no pretext of law for his action. A privateer is kind of like a licensed mugger. Somebody has given him a letter of marque or a commission to go out and seize the merchant vessels of a nation with whom the grantor of this letters of marque is presumably at war or at some kind of issue. Privateers do not fight battles, just like muggers. The last thing they are going to do is take on somebody who might hurt them. They go after unarmed vessels, usually much smaller vessels. A privateer might only mount 1 or 2 guns on the deck of his own ship, but he's going to go after vessels that mount none. Probably none of them look like Johnny Depp. In honor of the privateers and more often the pirates, however, I would like to point out that I am wearing my skull and crossbones braces. Primarily, the brothers were and saw themselves as merchants. They're businessmen who provided New Orleans and the lower Mississippi Valley not just slaves, but other valuable commodities that the planters wanted and needed. Their services just happened to be providing goods that were unlawful, which of course made no difference whatever to the people of Louisiana. Some things never changed. In the process, they also gained an intimate knowledge of a number of back doors to New Orleans. The smugglers had multiple routes. They would bring their goods essentially to the coast and then up bayous or up to lakes, where the Laffites would take the goods and then smuggle them by pirogue through the swamps and through the bayous into New Orleans itself. So they had these multiple routes from places like Grand Isle via Barataria, Bayou Saint-Denis or Grand Bayou on the Mississippi, Carrollton, Wilkinson's Bayou, Big Bayou Barataria, and Little Bayou Barataria through Bayou Rigolets. Note that virtually all of these are south of the city. Despite their illicit activities, the Laffite brothers made influential connections in New Orleans and successfully operated for years in spite of efforts to stop them. Though not the only smugglers in the region, they evolved into the most effective entrepreneurs, especially after President Thomas Jefferson's Embargo and Non-Intercourse Acts of 1807. This was the Non-Intercourse Act was banning trade. It wasn't banning that other thing. These acts stopped the flow of goods from Europe. When the War of 1812 erupted, the brothers' business flourished as the British blockade further constricted the flow of imports. Soon they would begin to acquire ships of their own and questionable commissions from shadowy Central American rebel juntas that enabled them to prey on Spanish merchantmen under some cloak of legitimacy. It appears that Pierre was never a seaman, or not much of one. His health is apparently not good. He may have had an early stroke, He may even have suffered from epilepsy. We don't know. But we do know that he was prone to the occasional seizure, and it seems like he must have had some kind of a medical event that left part of his face sagging, as if he had a palsy of some variety. After Louisiana's admission as a state, smuggling was no longer just a local embarrassment. Now it's a national problem. It impacted national honor. It struck at the heart of the customs revenue that was the major source of federal funds. And at a time when war shadows were looming. You may not realize this, but in 1812, 1815, the federal government derived 99.9% of its revenue from customs duties. The rest came from the sale of public lands, but the problem is people never paid for the public lands when they got grants. And then some is supposed to come from the vast profits to be made from the post office. Inevitably, events began to catch up with the Laffites. In November 1810, a privateer that they owned brought in a cargo worth an estimated $4,000, a considerable sum in that day. Pierre was with Jean and Barataria when it came in, and the brothers determined to accompany the pirogues full of goods on the route for sale in or near New Orleans. In the night, they were challenged by another boat loaded with United States soldiers who were trying to enforce the law. Shots were fired in the darkness, a soldier was killed, and the brothers were taken prisoner. The law was catching up to them. Now first with indictments for piracy, but also a man had been killed. The penalty for murder or for piracy, either one, was hanging. The brothers got released on bail for the charges for piracy, but Pierre would be rearrested and charged with the murder of a U.S. soldier. Still, they had favorable relations with the city's press. New Orleanians were happy to turn a blind eye to what the Laffites were doing because of the goods that it brought into New Orleans and the business that it allowed to be transacted. They helped keep, essentially, a dynamic economy going in the city of New Orleans. They might not have been guests in the finest parlors, but the goods and the services they provided allowed the upper crust to enjoy luxuries in their homes and daily lives that the embargo denied. Much of the Creole population was happy to turn blind eyes to their actions, content to enjoy the result, while even some of the Americans in the largely divided city were numbered among their customers. Rather in the mold of Robin Hood, the Laffites became minor folk heroes by defying interfering laws that were seen as being enacted by Easterners who were out of touch with Westerners' needs. The brothers seemed not to have realized it, but that made them valuable as America went to war for a second time with Great Britain. Should the war ever come to New Orleans, anyone who commanded the sympathy of the Creole population could be useful indeed, and to either side. On September 3rd, 1814, His Majesty's ship Sophie anchored off Grand Isle, and Captain Nicholas Lockyer came ashore and handed Jean Lafitte a packet of documents. For some months, the British had eyed the privateer's headquarters in and around Barataria, believing they might be useful in blockading New Orleans in the event of a British attack. The English thought all they would have to offer in return would be protection afterwards from prosecution for their smuggling activities and their violation of the slave trade and other maritime laws. Lockyer first handed Lafitte a copy of a proclamation calling on all Louisianians to rise and free themselves from the Americans and promising arms and support should they do so. That, they figured, would distract the Americans from within while Britain attacked from without. There was also a letter from Lieutenant Colonel Edward Nichols, commanding British land forces in nearby Florida, calling on Lafitte to place his privateer fleet and men under command of Captain William Percy of the Royal Navy, and promising generous land grants to all after Britain won the war, and for Lafitte himself, Jean Lafitte, a commission as a captain. And there has been a lot of confusion about this offer of a commission as a captain. It was as a captain in local militia. That is, he'd have a commission commanding his own men, among others. What it was not was an offer of a commission as a captain in the British Navy, as has often been misconstrued. Army Lieutenant Colonel Nichols hardly had the authority to make someone an officer in the Royal Navy, let alone at a grade in rank that was senior to his own. And nowhere was there an offer of $30,000 as a bribe to the Laffittes personally. Yet persistent legend insists that this happened, and it's often inflated it as high as 75,000 pounds, which in that era would have been about $300,000. The British didn't have that kind of money. When they paid bribes, and they did, to chiefs of some Indian tribes, among others, it was in the range of 300 pounds, maybe $1,200. Nichols advised Lafitte to decide quickly, hinting that there might soon be action in Louisiana, which to date had seen almost none. Pardon me. Lockyer also showed an order proving that he came at Captain Percy's bidding, so he was authorized to make this offer, and saying that he wanted the Laffittes to place themselves under his command for a move against Mobile, or at least to remain neutral. If you won't fight with us, don't fight against us. And finally, there was a letter from Captain Percy himself addressed directly to Jean Lafitte. It's interesting that he chose to address it to Jean, not Pierre. So even in that time, even the British perceived the younger brother as being the man in charge. It wasn't nearly as conciliatory as the other letters enclosed. He essentially demanded that the Laffittes must pay restitution to Britain for any goods and ships taken while flying the British flag, and that if they did not, then Captain Lockyer had his orders to destroy the Lafitte establishment entirely. Their only choice, this is an ultimatum, says Percy, was to place themselves under his command, serve him, and he would buy their vessels and enlist them and pay them as seamen. Jean Lafitte stalled by asking for 15 days to consider his response, though he hinted that he might accept the British offer, which is purely done, I think, in order to aid in stalling them off. It was a bargain he would have no intention of keeping. Britain was offering the Laffittes virtually nothing. The Laffittes routinely made more from smuggling in a single day than they Jean would make in a month, being paid as a militia captain. Selling their ships to Britain would only put them completely out of the privateering business. And a land bounty meant absolutely nothing. The land offered would be local land, which wasn't even bringing $2 an acre, and besides which, the Laffittes had no intention of becoming farmers. Farmers don't look like Johnny Depp. And everything depended on Britain defeating the United States and reclaiming Louisiana. There's really no bottom in the British offer. It had become apparent that whoever won the war, the brothers were likely to be out of business on American soil. At that very moment, as you heard earlier, Commodore Daniel Patterson was assembling an expeditionary force in New Orleans to destroy the privateer's lair of Barataria. Lafitte thought he might be able to use the British documents to buy time with the Americans as well. Besides, on reflection, he realized that he had more to gain from an American victory than a British one. If England won, he's out of business, with land he can't use, and he would be the subject of a nation that was already talking of abolishing slavery throughout its empire. He'd have no ships, and he'd have no trade to pursue if he had ships. If America won, he might have to shift his base of operations beyond its borders, but Texas is not that far to the west. But the market for his black gold and the other goods he could provide would still be alive and healthy. He might be able to parlay the British offer to his benefit and perhaps use it to get Pierre out of jail, where he was then under arrest, as I mentioned, for murder. Lafitte got the British documents in the hands of Governor William Claiborne in New Orleans. The same day they were received, someone broke into the Cabildo and got Pierre out of prison. We don't know if that's just coincidence. We don't know who did it. But certainly the timing is suggestive of something, perhaps. Within days, Pierre now, who's more literate, would write to Claiborne offering the services of the Baratarian privateers against Britain, if the governor would quash the charges against himself and others and issue a general pardon. Claiborne was tempted to delay Patterson's expedition, which was almost ready to go in motion, but Patterson moved before Claiborne could, and on September 15th, he virtually destroyed the privateer's establishment. Interestingly enough, the Laffites avoided fighting and advised the privateers in general not to resist. They simply left the anchorage and left their goods and their ships to be seized or burned. Fighting at that moment would have put them on the wrong side for sure, and so instead they simply escaped into the interior. They lost more than 24 vessels and warehouses full of trade goods, in all material with a resale value of perhaps at that time $500,000. A real king's ransom. However, they maintained touch with friends in the city. Advised by some civic leaders that they wanted to enlist the Baratarians' help in defending against the British, Jean sought out, as you heard before, Edward Livingston, very prominent attorney, a man who was close to Andrew Jackson. They sought Livingston's help as sort of a go-between, as their agent, to press their offer of assistance and perhaps even reclaim some of their lost property. In fact, after the war, the Laffites will sue, trying to get compensation for much of what was lost to Barataria. They didn't get it. Finally, word of their offer of help reached General Andrew Jackson, and late in October, Livingston wrote to President James Madison on their behalf. We don't realize that President James Madison, who was married to the woman whose name is misspelled on ice cream, was actually in correspondence about the pirates' defeat. By early December, Madison advised clemency in return for the Baratarian service, but meanwhile, on December 16th, Jackson had already been persuaded to grant an amnesty under martial law for those Baratarians who aided in defending New Orleans, where he expected that the British would attack in a matter of weeks. In the end, about 400 privateers, and smugglers came forward to take oaths of allegiance. It was later claimed that the Laffites provided much-needed cannon for the American Army. That is nonsense, because virtually all of their artillery was lost with their base at Barataria. But they did bring with them, as you have heard, about 7,500 musket flints that Jackson very much needed indeed. By December 22nd, the Lafitte brothers appeared in New Orleans in person, and within a few hours they met with Jackson, who gave them passes of safe conduct and sent them out to help defend the city. Jackson would keep most of the Baratarians together in a separate command under their own officers, but he set the Lafitte brothers apart, grasping that they could be useful both for their knowledge of Barataria and other water approaches to New Orleans, but more importantly, that the at least temporary commitment of these smugglers and themselves could resonate with a substantial Creole customer base who sympathized with them. Get the Laffites on your side, and perhaps the local French Creoles will come with them. Jackson gave them no rank as officers, no uniforms, and the like, but seems tacitly to have allowed it to be assumed that they were honorary members of his staff, and that is how he used them. The very day they met, Jackson sent Jean south of the city to Bayou Saint-Denis with orders to lead artillery and 50 soldiers, more than half the men who were posted in that bayou, to a place called the Temple, a slight elevation on the bank of Little Lake Barataria, to erect a fortification to resist any British attempt to approach the city by that back door. That done, Jean was to return to Jackson for orders. Pierre, on the other hand, who was more comfortable with spoken English as well, Jackson kept near New Orleans and consulted with him on the bayous and plantation irrigation canals below the city, places that presented possible avenues of British attack, but also options for American defensive lines. Pierre was much more familiar with the area south of New Orleans than he was with this region off to the southeast, but nevertheless must have had sufficient familiarity for Jackson to turn to him. Then on December 23rd, Pierre was at Fort St. John, where Bayou St. John flowed into Lake Pontchartrain, helping to replace a battery. Jackson learned that the British had approached within a few miles of the city and sent orders for Pierre to come reconnoiter the enemy. Jackson sent him to scout the far left of his line anchored in a swamp, and later Pierre guided some 800 American volunteers into position there to launch a surprise attack that night. It successfully pushed the British back toward the river, and Pierre was apparently in the thick of it, conducting himself well in what was probably his first real experience under fire. Having bought time with the British repulse, Pierre consulted in the selection of Jackson's defenses over the next several days, a line that included a major battery manned by Baratarians, commanded by Lieutenant Dominique Yu, who was portrayed by Charles Boyer in the Jules River version of the movie quite some time ago. I hadn't even thought who would portray Dominique Yu in Charlize Theron, I think. Of the 5,000 or more men composing Jackson's thin army on this line, the Baratarians probably numbered no more than 50. Virtually all the others were Bayou St. John and elsewhere out of action. But theirs was one of the more strategically important positions on the line. To take New Orleans, the British would have to go right over them. There is an alternative view, I just learned about this recently, of the Laffite's activities at this time, one that maintains that in fact they did sell out to the British, and that they in fact guided the Redcoats to Bayou Bienvenue and to Viray Canal. I don't know what this is based on other than some of that Kentucky hemp that Mr. Price talked about earlier. It's not in their interest to aid the British. The British take and win Louisiana, the Laffites are out of business. And first to last, the Laffites are men whose first, indeed only loyalty is to themselves and their own self-interest. There's nothing in it for them if Britain wins. Secondly, Pierre's movements are at least intermittently recorded, and all of them take place within the U.S. lines and at Fort St. John on December 23rd, the day that the Brits actually came and occupied the Viray Canal. Thirdly, that region down there is not their territory. They didn't know it as well as they knew other areas. And finally, it's recently been discovered that a Captain Robert Cavendish Spencer of HMS Caron, who was in charge of reconnaissance of Lake Gorn, left a record in 1832 of his actions in the invasion and detailed how he got a local French or Spanish fisherman, he didn't differentiate between the two, from Lake Gorn to lead a party to the Viray Canal, where they captured Gabriel Viray, of course, and opened the canal. The Laffites had nothing to do with it. But still, this is a new myth that may very soon gain some traction to join all the other myths about the Laffites. By the end of the first week of January, Pierre was probably still with the volunteers holding the left of Jackson's line. Meanwhile, no one knows with certainty just what Jean was doing, but he was probably still at the temple, or else reconnoitering other possible enemy avenues of approach as far as Grand Isle. But those never came into play. The January 8th British attack, of course, was a shambles from the start, but in the defense, the Baratarians worked their guns well, and several suffered wounds, including Charlize Theron, a.k.a. Dominique Yu. That still left the west bank of the river, where British redcoats were landing during the battle. As you've heard, they drove the Americans back, the Louisianians, Kentuckians, and Jackson sent 400 men across the river to bolster the collapsing line. With them, he sent Pierre Laffite to advise the commander on the spot of canals or bayous that might pose threats of their being outflanked by the enemy. Pierre reported back to Jackson, who thereafter used him as a courier until the threat abated. Then he sent Pierre south to aid in evacuating inhabitants from the coastlines, thus to remove anyone who might cooperate with the British if they tried a new landing down there. Jackson realized full well that he was attempting to achieve a victory and hold South Louisiana with a population that was seriously divided in loyalties, not so much pro-British as perhaps anti-American. By January 11th or 12th, Pierre reached the coast, probably picking up Jean on the way. We don't know with certainty. But by about January 18th, they were both back in New Orleans to learn that the British were evacuating Louisiana. The Veritarians got a full share of credit for their part in the victory. They were credited with working miracles, in fact. And Jackson, in his congratulatory address to his army, thanked them and specifically said that, I'm quoting, the brothers Laffite had exhibited the same courage and fidelity. Yet the Veritarians comprised less than 2% of Jackson's army, and the privateers and smugglers could hardly have been decisive, especially since about 7/8 of them weren't engaged in the actual battle line at all, being stationed out on the lake and elsewhere. Pierre's activities were peripheral, though valuable, and he certainly did see some action, but no one could ever quite recall seeing Jean on the battlefield, nor recall where he might have been. I can guarantee you, if you see Johnny Depp, you're going to know where you saw him. Arguably, the brothers' greatest contribution to the victory was the moral force of their example in being Creoles who sided with the Americans, thus bringing other French Louisianians to Jackson's aid. It's probably safe to say that the battle still would have been won even without the Veritarians, for in the end it was British mistakes that doomed the attack. As for Jean-Pierre, the government made good on its promise of pardons. Indictments were quashed, but they returned almost immediately to their old trade, to smuggling. And when forced to, they shifted their operations west beyond American borders to Texas and Galveston Island. And then in 1820, they abandoned it all to sail for Central and South America and new basins to give rise to their ever-growing legend. Thank you all for listening.
If you'd be willing to do a question and answer, we have a good amount of time.
If you'd like to, if there are any questions, or if you'd like to sing another verse of the Hundreds of Kentucky. I beg your pardon?
I say, didn't the brothers Laffite have an operation in Point Cafe Parish, New Roads?
Pierre.
I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question.
The question was, did the brothers have an operation in Point Cafe Parish, near New Roads, St. Francis, Philadelphia? Pierre got up that far by himself. He's actually, there's a record of him in a couple of legal transactions in Baton Rouge, and I think one slave transaction I found at the courthouse in Point Cafe. But this is just Pierre. This is before Jean has joined him. And they very quickly moved further south. Their principal, sort of the northern end of their base of operations is going to be Donaldsonville and south of there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, just as an aside, John Lafitte National Park is still misspelled, as is the college on the thing. With that being said, I've been curious as to the German coast, which would be Bayou des Almonds, which was in fact an entryway to the Mississippi River down through Barataria and to Grand Isle. In your research, were the Germans on what side of this issue?
My research concentrated on first strictly on the Lafitte brothers and what their immediate associates were doing, and I'm now speaking memory of more than 10 years past. I can't recall any German involvement at all. Though they must have, when they escaped from the attack on Barataria in September 1814, they in fact go to the German coast. So they certainly have friends there. But whether they were of Germanic ancestry or whether they were French, I don't know. The principal route used, by the way, more than any other, is by Laffite. I probably mispronounced that, too damn bad.
We both have German coast ancestors who served in the Louisiana militia, and they were part of regiments of German coast residents who served in the militia.
Very good.
During war days.
During the war days, that's
Yeah,
right.
so that was the involvement. They were kind of, they had intermarried with the French, so their names sound French, but it was definitely a German coast family.
It was nice that for once the Germans and the French got along. Yes, Ms. Patton?
I have research that Doing was also known as Alexander Laffite. He was the third
There have been some stories and some speculation that Dominique, who I mentioned, might in fact have been a third Laffite brother, and that also the name Alexander was attached to it. I never found anything to confirm that. That doesn't mean it's not possible, it just means I never found anything to confirm it. Back here? Somebody else?
Yes, that just answered my question.
Oh, okay. Let me get a question.
Yes, I think I just found something in the Freemasons records of their tableaus of their member lists. The Concord number 3 Masonic Lodge in New Orleans had Dominique Hugh as one of its members after the battle, and he listed his birthplace as the city of Set on the Mediterranean coast.
So SETB today.
Right, which is way far from Bordeaux, where the Laffites were from, so I would tend to think that that means he was not in any way related to the Laffites.
And that would argue against it. In fact, I believe on Dominique's tomb, I think the Masonic,
There is the Masonic temple.
whatever you call it, the compass and the ruler are on there. I should add, by the way, that there are Laffite descendants today. One of my Diane Burkett, intended to come, but was not able to. Neither brother had a conventional marriage. They both were engaged in that system called passage. They had usually a quadroon and a lot of wisdom. Pierre had a couple, the best known is Marie Villard, who actually, Pierre owned the house catty corner from the presumed blacksmith shop where Marie lived. They had several children at least, and one of them married a Pierre Roop, who was also a mulatto, who became a very prominent mulatto mason. There was a large Masonic body of mulatto masons in New Orleans. And eventually we tracked down a Diane Burkett, who was you remember about 4 greats descendant of Pierre? Jean, for a time at least, was involved with Marie's sister, Catherine, as I recall it was. And the Archdiocese records here do list one birth. I forgot if it was a boy or a girl. But then they disappeared. No one knows what happened to them. It is interesting that when the brothers left Galveston in 1820, they only lived another 3 years. They both beat on timely end. They just left their mistresses and presumably children behind, so it doesn't speak all that well of them in that regard, but ultimately their loyalties were to themselves. But just to anticipate a question that may come, in fact, only after they had left Galveston does Jonathan at least briefly become a genuine pirate. When his privateering vessel, I've forgotten the name of this particular vessel, does attack and take the merchant vessel of another nation before he has gotten even a phony commission from a Cartagena junta, or one of the Mexican juntas, I think, eventually united probably. He goes into the service of the junta in Colombia and actually becomes a captain in their navy, commanding a vessel called the General Santander, which unwisely takes on a much bigger Spanish warship in 1823 off the coast of Honduras. And there's actually a newspaper account in the Bogota, I forgotten, Caseta, something or other, that tells of his death, and he was presumably just tossed overboard and buried at sea. Pierre was already dead at that point, having been involved in some smuggling in Yucatan, and was engaged in a little scrap, a little skirmish with local police and militia, which he was wounded, and he died Isla de Mujeres, I think the island of women is called, near Zeeland, where his grave is now lost. I think the churchyard where he was buried may have been overrun by the ocean. So these are not untypical ends, certainly for pirates, but also for privateers. But when you have it, so we really only know much, and we know a lot for some brief periods, but really the lifespans that we know them from are about from 1810 to 1821. And when you have these huge gaps, otherwise our imaginations and the wonderful workings of mythology go to work to fill in the blanks. And it's the greatest sort of fun to try to go after the myth and not debunk it, because myth's important. Sometimes what we believe, it's more important why we choose to believe what isn't right versus believing what is right, because it says so much about us. And it's fencing the enterprise. One more question, I guess.
Sure, thank you. It said, you told us earlier that there were about 400 baratarians in the battle. That's a lot of men. Were those all men with allegiance to Jean-Pierre, or were those men that were just conscripted from the surrounding area?
They're just all privateers who had no reason to have any allegiance. They weren't raised by the Lafitte. The word just sort of got out. If you take under a Colombian or a Cartagenan letter of marque, you take some merchant goods, you can bring them into the Lafitte's operation. They have warehouses, they have the ability to get the goods to the market, which your average privateersman doesn't. The last thing he wants to do is get anywhere close to a place where there's a long river. And so it's a very loose association. The Lafitte's only really command the very few men who are actually working for them, but they're paid a kind of de facto respect as the men who are making this mercantile system work. And so the Lafitte's are allowed in some degree to speak for them. Not all the baratarians step forward, but the idea of a pardon was pretty attractive at that point. Many men don't step forward and give their oaths of allegiance, and they stay in the privateering business till the mid-1820s, when the United States and Britain navies combined essentially shut down that kind of privateering in the law. I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you very much.